Well, in our last session, we started out on the subject of creative persistence. And we looked at what Edison did to creatively persist through more failures to achieve more successes than any businessman or human in history. Not that people haven't achieved greater successes than Edison, but he did more. Although I guess you would have to call it getting electric power in homes, and I know about the Tesla thing and AC versus DC and all that stuff. But Edison is the one that motivated it. He's the one that people had confidence in and they put their money into. And so the fact that we all run on electric power, that's a pretty big deal. Thank you, Thomas Edison. Okay, so what did he do that was different? Number one, as we saw, he defined his dream in writing, took usually a page, usually would create a picture of what that dream would look like. If you're applying this to a personal relationship, maybe it's two stick figures holding hands, but something that stimulates the right side of your brain. Then he did something that was truly genius, and that was broad ramifications. And we went through that, how he had 9 pages of broad ramifications. Ramifications if he succeeded with the light bulb, ramifications if he didn't succeed. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do. Thirdly, he infused his dream in the minds of not a ton of people, but 3, 4, 5 people on the outside, not just his team. Of course, he would motivate his team and get them excited about it, but outside of that team, he would infuse his vision in the minds of a few people so they could, when he felt like giving up, they could give him the encouragement that he really needed to keep going. Okay, now we're going to look at number 4. Number 4 is expecting criticism. And criticism is something that most people shy away from. In fact, I've asked audiences, I one time asked 10,000 women in a meeting, I said, how many of you love to be criticized? Not a hand went up. I said, okay. How many of you like to be criticized? Not a single hand went up out of 10,000 women. Then I said, how many of you hate criticism? Guess what? Every single hand went up. Now, Proverbs teaches us that the kisses of a friend, or let's see, what is it? The blows of a friend, in other words, getting hit by a friend, is better than the kisses of an enemy. And Solomon tells us over and over again that criticism is our friend and that a wise man loves criticism. And you think, wow, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Because I'm sure your hand would have gone up when I asked about criticism. Well, Edison knew no matter what he did, because he was always trying things outside the box, there were going to be the critics. And so he had to have a way to deal with criticism. And what we're going to do in a future session, we've got a whole session that is the right way to deal with criticism. And we're going to show you how to deal with it. Because once you learn the right way to deal with criticism, nobody can ever hurt you with a criticism ever again. It insulates you from being hurt. Why? Because you learn how to make criticism one of your best friends. In the Bible, James says, when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Realize they've come to test your faith and produce in you what? The quality of endurance, being able to go on and go on and go on. Edison expected criticism. He expected problems. He expected failures. Why? He's swinging for the fence. As we pointed out in an earlier session, Babe Ruth was the home run king. Nobody can ever take that away from him. Why? Because he would hit more home runs for the number of times at bat than anybody in history, okay? And that never got surpassed. Yes, people have hit more home runs in a season. Yes, Hank Aaron had more home runs in a career. But Babe Ruth's home runs were in a fewer number of at-bats. fewer number of innings, fewer number of games, almost 2,000 less innings than Hank Aaron took to equal Babe Ruth's record. And nothing against Hank Aaron. I loved Hank Aaron. I love his story. What a man of grace and kindness. But expect criticism, expect it. He accepted. Now, here's one thing key. There's a wrong way to deal with criticism and failure and strikeouts, and there's the right way. The wrong way is to resent it as an intruder. Holy crap, I can't believe we failed at that. I am such an idiot. How could I let that happen? God, how could you let me fail at this? Look at all the money that was wasted. That's our natural response, but it's the wrong response. The right response is, what can I learn from this failure? As you'll see, when you're criticized, the right response is, okay, that criticism is so far off base, 99.9% of it is wrong, but is there a little nugget of gold in there that I can find, that I can see and bring about positive change in my life? And we'll see that when we get into the criticism. We have a whole session on failure, dealing with failure. We're not going to go deep in that right now, but the right way to deal with failure and criticism, strikeouts, is to embrace it, not defend, not excuse. When I first started out in my business of creating commercials to try to get people to respond and fight busy signals to place an order for the products I was selling, my success rate was 25%. 1 out of every 4 commercials that I produced created a hit. That means 3 out of 4 failed. And failure never came easy for me, in the sense that I had wasted my money, my partners, I had wasted their money. There was lost opportunity. The celebrity I was working with, who expected a big windfall, I had to make a phone call and tell him, no, it didn't work. And then the inventor of a product, I'd gotten their hopes up, and I had to call them and say, no, we swung and missed. That was horrible. But at the end of the day, when I would fail, as soon as the emotional pain wore off, which usually took about a week, then I would revisit the failure. And I would say, okay, why didn't that work? Why didn't people pick up the phone and order the product? And I'd call a few people. I would read the commercial to them. I would say, why do you think somebody didn't respond to that? And I'd hear people say, well, I wouldn't respond to it. Why? And they would tell me why, and I would write it down. Okay? So I did that on every failure I had in year 1 of our business. Guess what? The next year, my strikeout rate went from 75% down to 50%. 50% of the time I was hitting home runs, 50% of the time I was striking out. Once again, I analyzed the strikeouts. By the way, the greatest hitter of all time is a guy named Ted Williams. And I know other people may have records, but he had 2 back-to-back seasons of hitting 400. Nobody hits 400, even now. But he had 2 seasons, and he interrupted his career twice. Once for 4.5 years to fly a fighter in World War II, and he flew fighters in the Korean War. So 6 years out of his prime. If he had those 6 years back, he'd probably own every hitting record in baseball. But this is what's cool about Ted Williams. He would always look at the game film right after the game. He'd take a shower, cool off, burn off some steam, and then he would pull up the game film. And you know what he would look at? If he had 3 hits that day and 1 strikeout, he wouldn't look at the hits. He would look at the strikeout. How did that pitcher get to me? How did he fool me? Why did I swing and a miss? What went wrong? What did I do wrong? He always analyzed every game, his strikeouts. And with that became the greatest hitter, honestly, of all time, baseball hitter of all time. Amazing what he did by analyzing his strikeouts. So strikeouts And failures, they're not your enemy. You don't have to be afraid. They're one of your best teachers. When I talked to Steven Spielberg after we had both been out of school for 18 years, and we were looking at what we did right, what we did wrong, and what became obvious is both of us had lost our fear of failing. And that's the number one core fear for most men. We're afraid of failure. And we had lost that in our business life, not necessarily other areas of life, but in our business life. So, number one, accept full responsibility for your strikeouts. Don't blame anybody else. Even if somebody else is to blame, that's not your responsibility. You look at what they did wrong and you write that down. Okay, if I'm involved in another partnership, I want to avoid someone who's going to make that mistake over and over again. But what did I do wrong? And if you don't know what you did wrong, ask other people. Because a lot of times what's obvious to others isn't obvious to us. Do whatever you can to learn from your strikeouts. You analyze your strikeouts or failure after a brief timeout. You always take a timeout. Why? Because when you first strike out, it hurts emotionally, and it's hard to get by that. So give yourself a few days or a week, and then come back and do the analysis. Then, this is critical, you come back up to the plate another time. You don't walk away from the game. You come up again, but now you're going to have improvement in how you're going to swing. You've learned from your failures, and you're going to incorporate what you learned and not do that again, and you're going to instead, so you're going to have a better attempt. And remember, I called this the $1 billion difference. When our project, it was the most expensive project we'd ever put money into a test. And when we failed at it, we came back to the plate a second time with one change, and that improved something. And then we came back another time and added one more thing, and those two changes combined gave us the greatest home run record of all time. We have the longest running infomercial in the history of television by a long shot. And that sucker has just produced sales, revenues, profits, income to the partnership like nothing in our history. Okay, so you come back to the plate with an improved approach. Now here's the other thing. How do you handle other people's strikeouts? This is really important. Why? Because if you're part of a team, you're not the only one that's going to strike out. And I have a business right now, and we'll see a strikeout. We'll see a strikeout that one person makes in an effort. And the wrong way to handle a strikeout is, what were you thinking? How could you let that happen? God, it's so obvious. Use your head. Oh my gosh. Duh. All of those things are wrong. You know what that makes a person want to do? Makes them want to leave the team. And if they don't leave the team physically, they leave the team emotionally. You become contributing to hope deferred makes the heart sick. You're making their heart sick. You don't want to do that in an effort. So how do you handle other people's strikeouts? We're going to look at that in our next session.